Night wrapped Namsan Mountain in a heavy, breathless hush, broken only by the distant murmur of the city far below. Suspended against the slope like an act of defiance, the structure known as the monolith did not attempt to blend into its surroundings. It dominated them. Concrete slabs intersected with sheer planes of glass, jutting outward in impossible angles, as if daring gravity itself to object. Light from within cut through the darkness in rigid geometric bands, exposing nothing warm, nothing human. It was not a home built for comfort, but a manifesto rendered in architecture, declaring isolation, control, and absolute certainty. Emani Vance stood before the massive steel door, its surface unmarred by fingerprints or wear, as though no one truly belonged here long enough to leave a trace. The air was sharp with altitude and impending rain, clinging to her skin. She had not arrived through violence or brute force. Instead, she had peeled back the defenses with precision. 3 security layers, firewalls, biometric locks, and private encryption had folded in silence after a single email reached Park Joo-won's private server. Attached was one image only, twisted, rebar snapped like a brittle bone at the crash site. A truth disguised as a threat. Without a sound of resistance or welcome, the door slid open. No creak, no warning, just a smooth, mechanical retreat that felt less like an invitation and more like an assessment. Inside, the house revealed itself as a void of intention. White floors reflected light so cleanly they bordered on clinical. Black furniture sat at perfect right angles, untouched and unused. The air itself seemed engineered, locked at a merciless 18 degrees Celsius, cold enough to keep emotions from settling. There were no photographs to anchor memory, no flowers to signal life, no clutter to suggest spontaneity. It was a space curated to exclude humanity.
Take off your shoes.
The voice descended from above, measured and precise, carrying authority without volume. Emani lifted her gaze to the mezzanine, where a glass railing framed Park Joo-won like a museum exhibit. He stood perfectly still, as though movement were something he rationed carefully. His black cashmere turtleneck absorbed the light, sharpening the contrast against his pale, angular face. Every line of him appeared deliberate, from the fall of his gray trousers to the rigid alignment of his shoulders. His features were symmetrically flawless, yet exhaustion had carved shadows beneath his eyes, betraying nights spent wrestling with invisible calculations. I kept my boots on because if this house is built like your tower, I might need to run. Joo-won began his descent down the floating staircase, each step silent and controlled, almost rehearsed. The stairs seemed to suspend him in midair, mirroring the way he held himself apart from the world. His movement was fluid and economical, devoid of wasted energy. When he reached the floor, he stopped exactly 5 feet from Emani, an invisible boundary snapping into place between them. The distance felt intentional and engineered, as though proximity itself were a variable he refused to miscalculate.
My tower did not fail. My design was perfect. The load distribution was calculated to withstand a magnitude 8.0 earthquake.
Emani did not rush to contradict him. Instead, she reached into her bag with deliberate calm, fingers brushing past tools and documents before closing around a small plastic evidence bag. She withdrew it and tossed it lightly through the air. The snapped rebar spun once before Joo-won caught it with reflexive precision. Dirt still clung to the metal, embedded in its fractures. He did not react to the grime or the implication. His gaze locked onto the break itself, scanning it as if it might still confess something new. The design was perfect. Cheap steel, substituted during the pouring phase. Someone changed your specs, Mr. Park, and since you are known for micromanaging every single bolt, the police think you authorized the cost-cutting to pocket the difference. Silence stretched thin as wire. Joo-won finally lifted his eyes from the metal, fixing them on Emani with a stare sharpened by suspicion and intellect. They were cold eyes, accustomed to measuring failure in millimeters and lives in statistics. Yet beneath the calculation, something flickered, an uncertainty he refused to acknowledge. The house seemed to hold its breath around them, glass and concrete listening.
And you? What do you think?
Emani stepped forward, deliberately closing the space he had so carefully maintained. Her boots echoed softly against the pristine floor, a disruption in his controlled environment. She smelled of rain, of ozone, of the world outside these sealed walls. Her hair resisted gravity in untamed defiance, and dust stained her jumpsuit like a badge of authenticity. She was movement, mess, probability. Everything his house was designed to exclude. I think you are an arrogant, obsessive control freak. You would not compromise your perfect design for money. You would rather die than build something ugly. This was not greed. It was a frame job. The words struck deeper than accusation. For the first time in days, the relentless noise in Joo-won's mind, the endless equations of stress tolerance, failure points, and cascading collapse, fell silent. He saw her not as an intruder or a variable, but as a force. Chaos personified. She stood there unafraid, structurally unsound by every metric he trusted, and yet undeniably real. His gaze lingered, unblinking, as if committing her to memory against his will.
Why are you here, Miss Vance?
Emani did not soften her stance or her voice. This was not negotiation. It was disclosure. The truth sat between them like exposed wiring, dangerous and unavoidable. Outside, the mountain wind pressed against the glass, a reminder that the world beyond this prison of perfection was still moving and still alive. I am an independent forensic engineer. The insurance company pays me to find the truth. If you are guilty, I will bury you. If you are innocent, I will help you find who swapped the materials.
I do not need help.
The lie tasted bitter even as he spoke it. Emani's eyes sharpened, and she delivered the final load, bearing fact with surgical precision. The timeline collapsed inward, compressing his remaining options into a narrow, suffocating span. Really? Because the police are issuing a warrant for your arrest tomorrow morning. You have 12 hours to prove your innocence. And you are stuck in this glass box. Joo-won's fingers tightened around the rebar until his knuckles blanched, the metal biting into his palm. The symbol of his undoing pressed against his skin, unyielding. Slowly and deliberately, he turned away, motioning toward the deeper corridors of the monolith. The decision, once made, was absolute.
Come with me.
At 2 a.m, the home office no longer felt like a place meant for human occupation. It resembled the inside of a machine that never slept. Screens rose from the floor to the ceiling, layered like translucent walls, each one projecting a different stream of data. Architectural blueprints rotated slowly in 3 dimensions, structural stress simulations pulsed in cold colors, and thermal scans bloomed and faded like artificial heat signatures. The air hummed faintly, charged with electricity and quiet urgency, as if the room itself were holding its breath. Emani and Joo-won stood close enough that the glow from the screens washed over them both, blending their shadows into one elongated shape on the polished floor. Or at least, as close as Joo-won would tolerate. His posture was rigid and precise, every muscle held in disciplined restraint, while Emani leaned in without hesitation, comfortable in proximity and intrusion. Between them floated the evidence of a crime disguised as data, waiting to be interpreted. Here, the supply chain logs. The cement trucks were diverted for 20 minutes on the day of the pour. GPS data shows they stopped at a warehouse in Incheon. Her finger cut through the air with confidence, slicing across layers of information until the relevant timeline expanded before them. The numbers told a story of absence, 20 minutes unaccounted for, 20 minutes in which something critical had changed. In construction, minutes mattered, materials mattered, and concrete, once poured, remembered every sin committed during its creation.
That's impossible. My system tracks all materials in real time. If they stopped, I would have received an alert.
His hands moved with practiced speed, fingers striking glass and light instead of physical keys, pulling up redundancies and safeguards he had designed himself. This system was his pride, precise, unforgiving, incorruptible, or so he had believed. The idea that it could be blind, even briefly, was an insult to his identity as much as to his intelligence. Unless someone hacked your system to loop the GPS signal, she crossed into his space without asking, her shoulder brushing his, her hands replacing his on the interface as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Joo-won stiffened instantly. The sterile scent of metal and recycled air was disrupted by something warm and human. She smelled faintly of vanilla and concrete dust, a contradiction that made his head spin. He was accustomed to controlled environments and order. Her presence felt like contamination, and yet he did not step away.
You type like a hacker.
I break things for a living. Sometimes I break code. Look, her smirk was brief but sharp, a flash of confidence honed by years of surviving systems designed to stop her. With a few swift gestures, she peeled back the polished surface of the interface, diving into layers most users never saw. The room seemed to darken as back-end logs spilled across the screens, raw and unfiltered, exposing the skeleton beneath the elegant design. The alert was suppressed by an admin override code, code Alpha 09. The moment the code appeared, something inside Joo-won shattered. He froze completely, as if time itself had stalled. The blood drained from his face, leaving him pale under the blue-white glow of the screens. That code was not just a string of characters. It was a ghost from his past, a signature he knew better than his own. You know that code.
It's my father's code, Chairman Park.
The silence that followed was not empty. It was dense and oppressive, filled with implications too heavy to articulate immediately. Even the hum of the machines seemed to lower, as though the house itself understood the weight of what had just been revealed. Your father, the chairman of the construction conglomerate, why would he sabotage his own son's project? Joo-won turned away from the screens and walked toward the window. Each step felt deliberate and burdened. Outside, the city lights glittered like a distant galaxy, indifferent and unreachable. Reflected in the glass, he looked trapped, an architect imprisoned inside a structure of his own making, suspended high above the world but utterly confined.
Because the Hanel Tower was my bid for independence. If it succeeded, I would have spun off Archon Group as a separate entity. I would have left his control. He would rather see my legacy crumble than see me free.
His palm flattened against the window, as if he could push through it and escape into the lights beyond. The glass was unyielding and cold, a perfect metaphor for the man who had shaped his life. Years of obedience, expectation, and silent rebellion crystallized in that single gesture. He killed 12 people to teach you a lesson?
To him, people are just numbers. Overhead costs. I need the physical manifest from that warehouse in Incheon. It is the only proof that the materials were swapped.
The desperation in his voice stripped away the last remnants of his composed exterior. This was no longer about architecture or data. It was about survival, moral, legal, and personal. Without proof, the narrative would be written by someone far more powerful than either of them. Okay, we go to Incheon.
I can't. The police have surrounded the perimeter of the mountain. They are waiting for the warrant. If I leave, I'm arrested.
Emani turned to the surveillance feeds, her eyes scanning the external cameras with professional calm. The image confirmed his words. police cruisers idled at the base of the long, winding driveway, red and blue lights muted but unmistakable. The house was no longer just a home. It was a monitored enclosure. Well, it is a good thing I know how to break out of buildings, as well as I know how to break into them. The sound of the zipper was final and decisive. It cut through the tension like a blade, signaling motion where there had been paralysis. She was already thinking ahead, mapping exits in her mind.
This house is a fortress, Ms. Vance. It has biometric locks, thermal sensors, and reinforced steel walls. No one leaves without my authorization.
Joo-won, you built this house to keep people out. But every architect has a blind spot, a structural weakness they ignore because of arrogance. She moved toward the far wall with unhurried confidence, boots echoing softly against stone. There, a decorative waterfall cascaded down sheets of black slate, water catching the light as it flowed endlessly, soothing and ornamental. Beauty, carefully engineered. The drainage system. To handle this volume of water, you needed a wide bore pipe. And since you built this on a mountain, that pipe has to feed into the old municipal storm drains. Understanding dawned slowly on Joo-won's face, equal parts disbelief and admiration. He had designed that feature himself and dismissed it as purely functional and invisible. And yet she had seen it immediately.
That pipe is 60 centimeters wide. It is for water, not people.
I am flexible, are you? For the first time since the night began, something inside Joo-won cracked open, not in pain, but in reluctant amusement. A small smile touched his lips, fragile and unfamiliar, as if he were remembering how to trust someone.
I suppose I have no choice.
The storm drain was not merely narrow. It felt deliberately hostile, a concrete throat swallowing them whole. Darkness pressed in from every side, thick and suffocating, while the air carried the heavy, loamy stench of wet earth and rusted metal. Moisture slicked the curved walls, turning every movement into a cautious negotiation with gravity. Each breath tasted of soil and decay, as if the city itself were exhaling around them, indifferent to their fear. They crawled forward inch by inch, knees scraping, palms sliding through cold sludge. Emani led the way with practiced efficiency, her body low and steady, the flashlight clenched in her hand like an extension of her will. Its beam cut a thin, trembling tunnel through the dark. Behind her, Joo-won followed, shoulders hunched, every muscle tense as he tried to keep his clothes from brushing the filthy walls. For a man whose obsessive need for cleanliness bordered on reverence, this was a personalized vision of hell. Every splash of mud against his skin sent a jolt of revulsion through him, his mind screaming for disinfectant and order. Yet despite the panic clawing at his chest, he found himself watching Emani's movements. The calm certainty in her posture and the unwavering rhythm of her crawl anchored him, giving his spiraling thoughts something solid to cling to. "You're doing great, architect." Her voice echoed back through the pipe, distorted but steady, carrying an almost teasing warmth that cut through the claustrophobia. "Just don't think about the spiders."
I hate you.
He muttered the words through clenched teeth and lifted a hand to wipe mud from his cheek, only to smear it further. The sensation made his stomach churn, but there was no room to stop. "You need me." The pipe finally widened and spilled them out into open space. Cool night air rushed over their sweat-soaked skin like a benediction. They collapsed briefly at the base of Namsan, gasping, streaked with grime, hearts hammering. Above them, the city lights blinked indifferently. They were far from the police blockade, the danger temporarily reduced to a distant echo. Nearby, half hidden by shadow, sat Emani's car, a battered Land Rover that looked like it had survived wars both literal and mechanical. Its dented frame and mud-splattered tires told stories of rough terrain and harder decisions. "Get in." Her tone allowed no room for debate. Joo-won hesitated only long enough to take in the interior. Blueprints were stuffed into every conceivable space, edges curling and ink smudged. Empty coffee cups rattled against climbing gear and coils of rope. The vehicle was a rolling contradiction. Brilliant purpose wrapped in absolute chaos.
Do you ever clean?
He asked as he slid into the passenger seat, carefully positioning himself to avoid the worst of the clutter. I prioritize. She revved the engine, the Land Rover growling awake as the headlights sliced through the darkness and the car lurched forward. Now hold on, we're going to Incheon. The drive stretched tight with unspoken tension. Streetlights flashed past in rapid succession, painting their faces in alternating bands of gold and shadow. Joo-won's nerves sought control wherever they could find it. He opened the glove box, retrieved a lone wet wipe, and meticulously cleaned a small patch of the dashboard, as if restoring order there might calm the storm inside him. "Stop cleaning my car." She slapped his hand away without taking her eyes off the road, the gesture sharp and efficient. "Focus. If your father did this, he won't stop at sabotage. He'll have people watching that warehouse."
He has a private security firm called Blackstone. They are mercenaries.
The words hung heavy between them, thick with implication. "Sir, great. Mercenaries, I brought a hammer."
A hammer?
A big hammer. Joo-won studied her profile as she drove. The sharp line of her nose, the fullness of her lips set in concentration, and the unyielding determination etched into her jaw. There was an energy about her that bordered on exhilaration, a spark that suggested she was alive in this chaos.
You are enjoying this.
He realized it aloud, the thought surprising even himself. "I hate bullies." Her eyes remained fixed on the road, her hands steady on the wheel. "And I hate bad engineering. Your father is guilty of both." He said her name softly, testing its weight.
Emani.
The sound felt foreign and intimate on his tongue, like discovering a new flavor he was not sure he deserved to enjoy.
Why do you trust me? Everyone says I'm a cold-blooded sociopath.
"Structure?" She answered without hesitation, the word clipped and precise. "I looked at your designs. The Haeunil Tower, you over-engineered the safety features by 200%. You put redundancy systems in the fire escapes. You designed that building to protect people, not just to look pretty. A sociopath doesn't care about emergency exit flow rates." She glanced at him briefly, her gaze sharp but not unkind, as if assessing a load-bearing wall for hidden stress fractures. "You care too much. That's your problem. You build walls to keep yourself safe because you feel everything too deeply." Silence settled over Joo-won, heavy and exposing. The hum of the engine filled the space where his defenses had been. In just 6 hours, this woman had stripped him bare, understanding him with an efficiency that rivaled her ability to dismantle concrete and steel. He stared out at the rushing night, knowing something fundamental had shifted, whether he was ready or not. Dawn crept over Incheon in thin, colorless layers, barely touching the corrugated metal walls of the warehouse. The place sat like a sleeping animal near the docks, vast and industrial. Its breath the faint hum of electricity and distant traffic. 2 guards stood at the front gate, silhouettes against the growing light, stamping their feet against the cold and boredom. Their presence was casual but lethal, the kind of vigilance born from routine rather than alertness, and that made them dangerous in its own quiet way. "I'll distract them. You go in the back." Her voice was calm, almost conversational, as if she were suggesting a shortcut rather than the opening move of something that could spiral into disaster. Joo-won watched her face, noting the way her jaw set, the familiar signal that she had already committed to whatever risk this required.
Distract them how?
Emani moved to the trunk of the car with deliberate speed, fingers brushing past tools and equipment until they closed around a flare. The plastic casing felt absurdly light for something that could summon chaos. She struck it, the ignition spitting sparks before catching, and for a heartbeat, the world seemed to inhale. She hurled the flare into a distant pile of old wooden pallets. The fire erupted instantly, flames racing along dry wood with hungry enthusiasm. The sound was not just noise, but force. A violent exhalation that tore through the quiet dawn and announced itself to everyone nearby. The guards shouted, instinct overpowering training, and they ran toward the blaze, their boots pounding against concrete as smoke began to coil upward. The warehouse entrance was suddenly naked, unguarded in the brief window Emani had carved out of the morning.
Subtle.
His tone was flat, the remark a thin veil over nerves wound too tight. Effective? Go. They moved without further discussion, slipping around the side and forcing entry through a service door. Inside, the warehouse swallowed them. Steel beams were stacked in long, regimented rows, their surfaces cold and dull under flickering industrial lights. The air smelled of rust, oil, and dust, a graveyard scent for unfinished buildings. Joo-won pulled out his scanner, the red lines sweeping across barcodes like a searching eye. Each beep felt loud in the cavernous space, echoing in his skull as much as the room.
Here.
He pointed to a stack near the center aisle, his finger trembling despite his effort to stay steady.
Batch 404. These are the cheap ones. They have the Hanyul project stamp on them.
Take photos. We need the shipping manifest. They found the office tucked above the floor like a watchtower. Joo-won slid into the chair and went to work, fingers flying across the keyboard, bypassing security protocols he had once helped design. Emani positioned herself by the door, back straight, every sense stretched thin, listening to the building breathe.
Got it. A direct transfer order signed by... Oh, God.
What?
Not my father.
His voice fractured, years of certainty collapsing in on themselves.
My mentor. Director Choi, the man who taught me how to draw.
He betrayed you?
He works for my father.
The sound cut through him like a blade, the unmistakable metallic click of a gun being cocked. Time seemed to slow, every muscle locking as they turned toward the doorway. Director Choi stood there, older than Joo-won remembered, sorrow etched deep into his face. The pistol in his hand was steady. Behind him, 3 mercenaries waited, their expressions empty, weapons raised with professional indifference.
I'm sorry, Joo-won. The chairman didn't want you to go to jail. He just wanted the tower to fail so you would come back to the family. But you had to investigate. You killed 12 people, Choi.
Joo-won stepped in front of Emani without thinking, his body acting before his mind could catch up.
For what? Loyalty? For stability. The chairman is the pillar. You are just a beam. You cannot stand alone.
No. Joo-won, move. I have a plan.
I am not letting you get shot.
I am not going to get shot. Duck. She acted before doubt could intervene, slamming her foot into a lever embedded in the wall. Metal screamed overhead as the crane released its burden. A pallet of bricks plunged downward, gravity turning it into a weapon. The impact was thunderous. Dust exploded into the air, screams tearing through it as the mercenaries scattered, training dissolving into survival. The world became noise and motion and blinding white chaos. Emani seized Joo-won's hand, her grip iron hard, and pulled him into motion. Run. They ran through the maze of steel and shadow, bullets whining past, striking beams with sharp metallic pings that ricocheted through the space. Every step felt borrowed, every breath stolen. They skidded to a halt at a loading dock door, tall and unyielding, its electronic lock dark and silent. Can you open it?
It's electronic. I need time.
We don't have time. Gunfire chewed into the crate shielding them, splinters flying. Joo-won glanced at Emani, really looked at her, taking in the fear, the sweat, the undeniable fact that she was still here, still alive.
Emani,
See, work the lock, Joo-won.
if we die here...
We are not dying. Open the damn door. He tore into the panel, wires sparking under his hands, the smell of ozone sharp in his nose. The door shuddered, groaned, and finally began to rise. They rolled through just as figures appeared at the far end, weapons raised. Without hesitation, they jumped. The fall was brutal. A 10-foot drop into sand that knocked the breath from their lungs. Pain flared and then dulled beneath adrenaline. For a heartbeat, they lay tangled together, the world reduced to pounding blood and ragged breaths. Joo-won stared down at Emani, realizing that everything he thought defined him was gone, and in its place was a clarity so sharp it hurt. He kissed her, not gently but desperately, a collision born of fear and relief. She answered with equal force, pulling him closer, as if anchoring him to reality. "Come on, we have to go." They scrambled into the car and tore away from the dock, glass shattering behind them as bullets chased their escape into the breaking morning. Morning filtered through the skeletal ribs of the unfinished safe house, pale sunlight catching on concrete edges and exposed beams like a quiet confession. The structure sat deep in the forest on the outskirts of Seoul, a forgotten prototype Joo-won had designed years ago when his faith in perfect systems was still intact. Nature had begun reclaiming it, moss creeping along the floor and dust softening sharp corners, but the building still held, stubborn and secretive. It was isolated, unregistered, invisible to surveillance grids. For this brief pocket of time, it meant survival. They were safe, for now. Joo-won sat cross-legged on the cold floor, the chill seeping through fabric and skin, grounding him. In his palm lay the USB drive, small and unassuming, yet heavy with stolen data capable of collapsing empires. His gaze never left it, as if the device might rearrange itself if unattended, as if information were a living thing. Around him, the house breathed as wood creaked and wind whispered through gaps, each sound reminding him that even the most controlled designs eventually yielded to entropy. From the narrow bathroom came muted sounds of movement as water ran, and a sharp intake of breath was quickly suppressed. Emani stood before a cracked mirror, alcohol stinging the cut on her cheek as she pressed a cotton pad to skin already bruised by violence and adrenaline. The reflection showed a woman marked but unbowed, dust clinging to her jumpsuit like evidence of survival. Pain was familiar to her, almost procedural, yet this one lingered, close to the eye and too intimate to ignore. Joo-won rose and moved toward the doorway, each step deliberate, as if he were crossing a fault line. He leaned against the frame and watched her without announcing himself. An unfamiliar tightness settled in his chest, a sensation he would have classified as a flaw in any other context. Seeing her hurt fractured something precise inside him, something that had once believed damage could always be quantified and contained.
"You're hurt."
His voice emerged quieter than intended, stripped of authority and carrying concern he had not engineered. Hazard of the trade, she winced despite herself as the alcohol bit deep, her bravado thinning just enough to reveal the exhaustion beneath it. Without asking, Joo-won stepped closer and gently took the cotton pad from her fingers. His hands were long, cool, and steady, movements precise, yet softened by care. He cleaned the wound with attention usually reserved for blueprints and load calculations, every touch deliberate and reverent. The tenderness contrasted sharply with the ruthless reputation that followed his name.
"You saved my life."
The admission seemed to cost him something, a surrender of hierarchy he had never rehearsed. "You saved mine." She met his eyes in the mirror, her gaze steady and unflinching, refusing to let him minimize what he had done. "You shielded me."
I calculated the trajectory.
The words came automatically, a reflexive retreat into numbers and angles, a place where emotion could not follow. "Shut up about calculations, Joo-won." A soft smile curved her mouth, disarming and patient. "You protected me. Just admit you have feelings." The cotton pad slipped from his fingers and fell into the sink. Joo-won planted his hands on either side of her, the porcelain cold beneath his palms, trapping her between his arms and the mirror. The proximity shattered his remaining defenses as her warmth and presence disrupted every internal structure he relied on.
I have significant structural instability when I am around you.
Emani laughed, the sound filling the small room and reverberating off tile and concrete. It traveled straight through him, loosening joints he had not known were locked and leaving his knees weak in a way no physical threat ever had. Is that architect for I Like You?
It is architect for you have destroyed my foundations, and I do not want to rebuild them.
When he kissed her, it was nothing like before. The kiss unfolded slowly and deliberately, as if time itself had agreed to decelerate. He lifted her onto the sink counter, awkward yet certain, and his hands moved over her dust-streaked jumpsuit with growing urgency, desperate for contact and proof.
Imani,
His voice brushed her neck, breath unsteady and stripped of calculation.
I do not know how to do this. I do not know how to be messy.
Emani worked at the buttons of his shirt, each one undone a quiet rebellion against order. Her touch was confident and grounding, an invitation rather than a demand. I will teach you. Chaos is beautiful, Joo-won. It is where life happens. They came together in the morning light, spilling through unfinished walls, surrounded by raw concrete and open sky. It was not perfect, controlled, or clean, and that was the point. Layers fell away as they moved, a shedding of skins neither had known they carried. In that fragile sanctuary, the architect surrendered his need for control, and the demolitionist found shelter. They did not go to the police. That option had died long before the tower ever did. In this city, law enforcement was not a pillar of justice, but a commodity, traded quietly in boardrooms and private clubs. Every badge had a price, every siren an owner. Joo-won understood this with a clarity that burned. So instead of dark alleys and locked doors, they chose the brightest battlefield possible. They went to the press conference, a cathedral of cameras and consequences, where lies were usually blessed and where truth, if sharp enough, could still draw blood. The Archon Group headquarters gleamed under artificial lights, its glass facade reflecting rows of reporters packed shoulder to shoulder. Chairman Park stood at the podium like a grieving patriarch carved from stone, his tailored suit immaculate, his expression carefully fractured. This was theater at its most expensive. He announced the supposed results of the internal investigation with a voice practiced in boardrooms and funerals alike, placing the blame squarely on Joo-won. Each sentence tightened the narrative with negligence, betrayal, and madness. The crescendo followed with an official manhunt for his own son, labeled as mentally unstable, dangerous, and unfit for society.
My son is sick. He cut corners to fund his lavish lifestyle. It breaks my heart.
The chairman paused and allowed the cameras to feast on the performance. His shoulders sagged just enough, and his eyes glistened without shedding a tear. Reporters scribbled furiously. This was the image that would dominate the headlines: a father betrayed and a titan wounded by his own blood. For a brief moment, it almost worked. Then, the giant screen behind him flickered. A tremor rippled through the image, and static crawled across the display like a warning. The hum of conversation faltered, and the technicians froze. Moments later, Joo-won's face filled the screen, calm, well-lit, and unmistakably alive. The room inhaled as one.
Hello, Father.
A raw gasp tore from the crowd as Chairman Park went rigid and his practiced composure shattered in real time. Blood drained from his face as if pulled by an unseen hand. This was not in the script. Joo-won's voice carried through the speakers with surgical precision. He was not hiding in the shadows, but broadcasting from the safe house, surrounded by quiet machines and unblinking servers. Every syllable was deliberate, sharpened by sleepless nights and righteous fury.
You speak of cutting corners. Let us look at the corners.
The screen transformed into a weapon as documents appeared in crisp succession. Warehouse manifests and procurement orders were stamped and signed by Director Choi. Authorization codes traced in red led not to a rogue employee, but directly to the chairman's personal account. The final blow arrived in motion with a security video from the warehouse showing Director Choi, pale and sweating, confessing everything. It was not speculation or accusation, but evidence.
The chairman did not want you to go to jail. He wanted the tower to fail so you would come back to the family.
The room erupted into chaos as reporters shouted over one another and cameras flashed in blinding bursts. The chairman swayed and gripped the podium as if it were the only solid thing left in his universe. His mouth opened, but no sound came, and for a terrifying second, it seemed his heart might simply give up the fight. But Joo-won was not finished. Vengeance is not a single strike, but a sequence.
Emani.
The feed cut to the construction site of the collapsed tower, a graveyard of twisted steel and broken concrete beneath an open sky. Sirens were absent, replaced by the low murmur of a news crew that Emani herself had summoned. She stood firm before them with boots dusted in gray powder and a sledgehammer resting in her hands. Behind her loomed a support pillar from the remaining north wing, scarred, exposed, and waiting. This is Emani Vance, structural forensic engineer. The chairman claims this building is safe and plans to repair it, but the corruption goes down to the bone. Emani adjusted her stance with ritual calm and swung the hammer with precision at a small sensor box she had installed earlier. The impact thundered across the site and triggered a controlled chain of secondary detonations along the exposed rebar. It was not a collapse, but a revelation as metal that should have held like bone disintegrated into dust. The cameras captured everything. The entire structure is wrought, just like the leadership of this company. Police sirens began to wail in the distance and grew louder by the second. This time, they were not hunting a ghost on a screen, but coming for the man at the podium. At Archon headquarters, Chairman Park was swallowed by aides and officers alike as his empire collapsed faster than any tower. From the safe house, Joo-won watched it all unfold. The smile that crossed his face was quiet and almost tender. It was not joy, but completion. On the screen before him, concrete and lies had fallen together, and it was without question the most beautiful demolition he had ever seen. 1 year had passed, and time had softened the sharpest edges of memory without erasing them. Where the Hanil Tower once clawed at the sky, there was now open ground, carefully landscaped into a park that breathed instead of looming. Trees stood in quiet rows, their leaves whispering to the wind like voices lowered out of respect. Stone pathways guided visitors toward a simple memorial, its surface cool and unadorned, reflecting the sky above. People came here not to look up in awe, but to stand still, to remember, to let the city pause for a heartbeat. Directly across the street, life had asserted itself with deliberate confidence. A renovated building stood with clean lines and wide windows, sunlight spilling into its interior as if invited. The sign by the entrance was modest but unmistakable. Vance and Park, architecture and forensics. It represented not just a business, but a philosophy born from ruin and rebuilt with intention. The door opened and closed throughout the day, footsteps echoing with purpose, each one proof that something new had taken root exactly where loss once dominated the landscape. Inside, Joo-won sat at his desk, posture relaxed yet precise, a familiar balance he had perfected over years. The surface was still immaculate, every document aligned, every tool placed with care. Yet the space was no longer sterile. A single photo frame rested near his right hand, catching the light. In it, he and Emani were frozen in a moment of shared laughter, faces smudged with dust, eyes bright with survival and defiance. The image radiated warmth, a reminder that joy had persisted even in collapse. Beside the frame stood a vase that deliberately broke the order of the room. Wild flowers spilled outward in unruly directions, colors clashing and blending without apology. Their stems were uneven, their petals imperfect, and that was precisely the point. They were alive, untamed, and temporary. Joo-won glanced at them now and then, not as a distraction, but as an anchor, a silent affirmation that not everything meaningful needed structure to endure. The door opened with a soft, familiar sound, and Emani stepped inside, as if the office had always been an extension of her presence. She wore a white suit, crisp and professional, but the clean sneakers beneath it told a more honest story. They spoke of long days, of movement, of a refusal to be constrained by expectations that no longer mattered. Light followed her in, catching in her hair and tracing the sharp confidence of her stride. "We got the contract, the new opera house in Busan. They want structurally sound and breathtaking." Her tone carried triumph, but also a grounded certainty earned through experience. The desk supported her weight easily, solid and reliable, much like the partnership they had built. Papers rustled softly beneath her hand, the mundane sounds of work blending seamlessly with the intimacy of shared victory.
I can do breathtaking, but I will need you to check the load bearings.
He rose from his chair in one smooth motion, the chair rolling back quietly as if unwilling to interrupt. His expression held a spark of excitement, but also trust. This was how they worked, vision balanced by scrutiny, ambition anchored by reality. His gaze met hers, steady and open, inviting collaboration rather than command. Always, the single word carried layers of history. It was a promise repeated through crises and late nights, through arguments resolved and compromises forged. It echoed in the room, not loudly, but deeply, settling into the walls like a permanent fixture. Joo-won closed the remaining distance between them, his hand gentle but certain as he pulled her close. The world outside the office seemed to recede, the hum of the city dimming to a distant murmur. Their bodies aligned with an ease that came from knowing each other completely, from having seen fear and strength intertwined in equal measure.
You know, I am thinking of redesigning the house on Namsan.
His voice lowered, intimate, as if the idea itself were still fragile. The thought had clearly been turning in his mind for some time, tested and reconsidered in quiet moments. It was not just about walls and materials, but about what the space would hold. "Oh, what is wrong with the concrete cube?" She tilted her head slightly, curiosity bright in her eyes. The question was light and teasing, yet attentive. She knew the house well, every sharp angle and minimalist line, every echoing room that had once felt safe precisely because it asked for nothing.
It is too cold and it needs a nursery.
The kiss was tender, lingering just long enough to convey certainty. His words followed naturally, unforced, carrying the weight of a future imagined without fear. The notion of warmth was no longer abstract. It was something he wanted to build deliberately, room by room, life by life. Emani smiled then, a slow, luminous expression that transformed her face. Her eyes shone with a mixture of amusement and wonder, reflecting possibilities she had once kept carefully contained. "A nursery implies chaos, Mr. Park. Toys, noise, mess." She listed the words like evidence, but there was no resistance in her voice. Each imagined inconvenience was softened by the affection beneath it, by the unspoken understanding that chaos could also mean laughter, growth, and love that refused to stay tidy.
I know, I am looking forward to it.
The smile transformed him, erasing the last traces of guarded reserve. It was the look of a man who had accepted uncertainty and chosen hope anyway, who no longer needed control over every variable to feel secure. He kissed her again, this time without urgency, letting the moment exist on its own terms. Outside the wide windows, the sun bathed Seoul in light, glinting off towers of glass and steel. The city stood as it always had, ambitious and relentless, forever reaching upward. But within this office, among blueprints and flowers and shared dreams, something far more resilient had been constructed. Not just a firm, not just a future, but a home built on trust, survival, and the quiet courage to begin again.